You have the floor, Marcel.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Marcel Broesky. I'm 44 and a Libra. I like to side-by-side. I have a chainsaw collection. I own a sawmill. Like to go camping, including in the winter. My record is camping in a tent in -40. And let me tell you, that is a life-changing experience, quite literally. It's cold to the point where you're not sure that you're going to wake up in the morning. I grew up pretty poor on a hobby farm, and it was part of my family's sustenance more than it was the trend to eat organic and eat local. And throughout my career, I've been down a path where I've seen both sides of this story. It's been kind of interesting. From the beginning, my first exposure to a computer would have been in grade 4 to grade 6. We had an Apple IIe, and I can't remember the name of the drawing program, but this would have been before I'd ever seen a mouse on a computer, that's for sure. So everything was programmed in using commands, but that also included the time where the vulnerable game, the Oregon Trail, was really exposed to people. We played that in school, and it was the latest in technology. After that, I took a typing class in junior high, and my best friend had a computer, a 386 DX33. Anyone not familiar with what a DX is? A long time ago, we had DX and SX, and that was kind of the precursor to Pentium and Celeron. And now we've got the i7, 5, and 3. Classification of CPUs has changed. I'm sure you're all aware of that. Shortly after junior high, I went and I did my orientation at high school, and I walked into a room, and on one side they had a lab full of computers, and on the other side they had drafting tables, and up on the wall was a wireframe of a space shuttle. And I thought, I don't know what this is, but this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life, and this is what I want to do. Whatever this is what I want to do. And I did pretty good in industrial design, learning to draw both on the computer in a version of CAD that was still DOS-based. We didn't have Windows CAD yet. We didn't use mice. We used tablet and digitizers. But as time went on, I learned that on a novel network, you could issue a set of commands, and if the network wasn't secured enough, you could hop to different segments of the network, including one that had internet connectivity. And a friend had shown me what IRC2 was, and I'd kind of hopped on there. Now I'm going to blur some of this together because it kind of all happened at the same time, but I'm going through my notes so I don't forget some of these key moments. Dave and I went to high school together, and he had been learning how to program in Quick Basic, and we did what everybody does. Let's make a game. It's the most accessible to you. It's a way that you can express yourself on a computer outside of, well, now social media. So I would program text adventure games, and then Doom came out, and we sort of snuck Doom onto the computer lab and played Doom a little bit, but I kind of went back to the programming thing, and guilty of exploiting what was easily exploited, some of the nefarious aspects of it. Our command prompts for logging in, or login prompts, were DOS based, and we would boot off of floppy. So I wrote a keylogger that looked exactly like the NetWare login at the time, and auto exec back would trigger login2.exe, and after it appended the first two sets of fields you filled out to a text file, it would crash, and login.exe would run. Every day after school, I would go and reset all the computers. They would re-execute the autoexec.bat and go again. And I tell people my age that went to that school, if you logged into a computer, I got your username and password. That kind of has me looking out for the payback constantly, and it puts me in a security focus now. this is one of those do as I say, not as I do moments. You shouldn't do that in class. You should, there's white hat exercises now. There weren't white hat exercises then. Stick with the white hat ones. But around that time, my parents actually got me to come home from school because I would stay there until 10 o'clock. That was the only access to a computer I had. So they tricked me into coming home after school by buying a computer. And I got a modem as soon as I could. A 2400 baud modem, and I used it to connect to BBSs. And that was my first experience of having a home computer and connecting with other people to participate on forums, local forums, exchange files. I got into music production at the time. And that led to the internet, the concept of having a globally connected BBS just really fascinated me. I'm flipping back and forth. I'm getting a lot of knowledge from the internet at this point. I'm flipping back and forth between my schoolwork and programming and experiencing the internet. And for extra credit, I wrote a rudimentary CAD application for my industrial design course. And the teachers gave me extra credit for it. Shortly after that, my interest in design sort of dropped off. And I really knew that I was in that class because I was interested in computers. So the next term, I kind of dropped my classes and I started taking computer programming. They called it computer science, but it was Turbo Pascal programming. About 2 weeks into that, and I said to the teacher, can I take the book home, the textbook home? And he says, yep. And I said, how far are we getting in this course? And he says, chapter 5. I said, great. I went home and my friend, the internet, lent me a copy of Turbo Pascal. At this point, I've been programming quite a bit in Visual Basic 4, which led to Visual Basic 6. And a pretty good handle on it. I went through the course material in 5 hours. I brought the book back and I said to my teacher, I'm done. Can I write the test? And the teacher said, no. So then I went back home and I programmed at the rate that I was used to programming. I'm reading RFCs on common protocols at the time. I was 18 by the time I wrote my first web server, which was in 1996. So that was quite some time ago. People weren't really doing that. I made an FTP server and an IRC client hybrid because file sharing had you go through this long process, and quickly identified that we could streamline this by letting people browse over IRC to determine whether or not they wanted to log into the computer to download the files. I know I'm dating myself here, but trying to highlight is from very early on, I had a passion for computers that couldn't be explained, at least not by my parents. One day I took apart the family computer and put it back together, and I went to turn it on, and it did not work. I learned quite a bit that day, like hard drive cables need to be plugged in a specific way or it's just not going to work. But clearly there was a seed and I needed to grow it over time. Now my first real jobs were not in computers. I grew up in Steinbach, and for somebody that spent a lot of time on the internet learning how computers and programming worked, the dial-up connection, I had to do this at nighttime, and I was not awake during class hours. So I had a bit of a rough start to my career. I built hog barns, did equipment installation in them. I did backbreaking concrete and paving stone work. I washed dishes, and I worked as a short order cook at a Gracie Spoon until a friend asked me if I would be interested in renting his spare bedroom and working at his internet-based computer parts retailing business called MLH Systems. And I said, yeah, that sounds awesome. I'll take anything. I know I want to work with computers, and I could program internet protocols, but if putting together cheap PCs is what it takes to get me into computers, I'm in. I'll do it. My workday looked like rolling out of bed, scooting over 3 feet to my chair and sitting down at my workstation. And I mean, I had a social life, but I was really into computers. So that meant online gaming and participating in gaming groups as well. Now, that eventually took us to opening up a retail location, and I kind of headed up sales more than service. We hired some service guys, the owner and I, and over some time, that business failed. Lots of small businesses fail over time. But as that went down, I looked for other opportunities, and being as enterprising as I am, I found an organization that was willing to let me come to their place of business and work on their computer systems, their business computer systems, 1 day a month, kind of indefinitely. Negotiated a year's worth of payment up front as a retainer, and 1 day a month I would go visit this foundry in Selkirk. I would help them migrate off of Novell network onto a Windows-based network, and just guide their technology growth. That was only sustainable for so long, and I went and I got another job at a computer store. I worked at CBIT. I worked in the service department at first, fixing machines, and that took me to doing that for a couple of years. A position opened up in their managed service provider or their outsourced IT area, and I spent some time working there. And that was a good experience because I got to see a bunch of different environments. They were small environments, but I got to see a bunch of different environments, and throughout my career, it's been a common theme. Everywhere you go is totally broken, and you can't believe that they've survived this long. So I know that the next environment I go to, if there's another one, that one will also be totally broken, and I can't believe they've survived this long. I mean, this is a 350-year-old enterprise, and I can't believe they've survived this long. So I'm sure that the next one will also be broken. After CBIT, I moved to a larger MSP, and this is where we started to get into some heavier metal, bigger servers, working with SANs, working with VMware. And this is a very important part of my career. I mean, I've got to have worked at 100 to 200 different businesses at some capacity, and you learn a little bit each time, and constantly growing a person's career by learning a little bit each time is it's massively invaluable. The gentleman I recently hired, he asked, I mentioned that I worked for MSPs, and he says, was that a good experience? Because I had people ask me to do that, and I said, it was invaluable. I can't stress how much exposure you get in a short period of time working in that capacity. I worked for a couple of different MSPs before I landed my first enterprise job. I worked for what is now Canada's largest pork producer. They're based out of La Broquerie and Neepawa. Head office is in La Broquerie. They have, I think, somewhere in the area of $2 billion a year in revenue. They'll have 3,000 to 4,000 people working for them. And when I say enterprise job, the definition of an enterprise is when your business has a stack. So like an application can have a stack, or if we talk about LAMP stack, I'm sure you're all learning about LAMP stack. It's just a group of things that when put together gain the benefit of being integrated together. So this was my first enterprise job. I got my first real SAN experience there. In fact, I worked with IBM SANs, and their code is called StoreWise. And I had an opportunity to identify a bug there, and we had a whole code level probe to prevent other people from doing that. got a chance to take their environment from white box and physical to enterprise grade hardware and virtualization. Even tier 1 ERP applications were virtualized. I went to VMworld. I met the inventor of VMFS through his new product called Pernix Data, sold to Nutanix. That's a server-side caching. And I got that environment to a place where I felt like they were pretty good, and there wasn't a whole lot more that I could do there. And if you look at my first jobs up until this point, I'm looking to constantly build on my skill set. I'm switching every 3 to 5 years to find a weight class that I'm not comfortable in, enter that weight class, and excel to a point where I feel like there's little challenge left for me here, and it's time to move on. So I switched to consulting. And my first placement was working with SaskTel doing DR as a service. I started late on that project, so my role was really to develop architecture documentation standards and proofread the content pulled together by the other group or the other people in the group. I trained their architects on the DR as a service software, which is Zerto for anyone interested. And as that project closed down, the sales folks at my organization placed me at the Northwest Company. I started here as a contractor, but after about a year and a half, I was asked if I was interested in coming on full time, to which I said no, because I have a non-compete clause, and that would be ethically wrong to do. And the next day, the director said to me, well, what if I can negotiate that being okay? And I said, yeah, absolutely. This place is totally screwed. I would love to work here because that gives me an opportunity to influence and make change in an organization. And I'm not here to sit by and click next. I'm here to do new and interesting things. When I started as a contractor, I was brought on to consult on DR, work to backfill their missing VMware, and unbeknownst to me, help kick off a new store refresh and ERP refresh project from a server and infrastructure perspective. Since then, they brought me full-time on as a manager, and some of the things that I work on are moving off of legacy systems. We've got two Unix platforms, multiple Unix environments, and the HPUX stuff is older than my daughter, and she's married and lives 2 provinces over. So it's pretty old. The best thing about Unix is the worst thing about Unix. It never breaks, so you never replace it. Even if you can't SSH to them anymore, or even if you could never SSH to them. And then Telnet was the only protocol available, and that's the only operating system your legacy ERP supports. It still won't break. They brought me on to tackle DR, and when I started, we had 12 different backup solutions. That's a lot for a team of under 10 to manage. So we've been working on dropping that down. There's no cloud presence here. So I brought cloud to the organization, not just in Teams and Office 365, but governance standards. Some of our first cloud native applications have been here since I've been here. I still participate in the VM world from a technical perspective. I participate a little bit from the storage perspective. Storage is probably my #1 proficiency, but I do a lot of team building, coaching people through their careers, and constantly working on mine. As part of team building, any new person that comes into my team, we sit down and we generally have 2 sessions, and it doesn't typically matter what skill level they're at, but senior guys usually have a pretty good handle on this. We'll talk about how to make a decision and how to learn to read. I'd love to elaborate on that, but we would need some materials here to go over that. You're more than welcome to reach out to me on Discord and I can elaborate a little bit more. But those are two demonstrations that I do for absolutely everyone, because in this industry, making a decision, while that might seem pretty rudimentary, is critical, because it's constant decisions being thrown at you, and learning to read is another one. In my career, I've gone from client server to virtualization to now Kubernetes and the cloud. That's 3 generations of infrastructure. And if I can't read at an efficient rate, and if I can't find a way of retaining and recalling information, there's just no way I'm going to be able to excel in this career, be pigeonholed into one role and not really grow from there. That might be good for some people, but for me, that's critical. When I hire somebody, I don't typically look for, okay, what school did they go to? What experience do they have? I mean, experience is important, but the third last guy that I hired had never worked in enterprise computing. He was a printer repairman. He is being trained up to be our DR expert, and we're training him as a security person. And why would I hire somebody with no experience and no formal education? Well, there's something that I would hope that anybody going into formal education has, and that is an unquenchable, insatiable thirst for knowledge. This person is in a extended peer group on Discord. In fact, anytime I would talk about my job and I would cite a technology or a method, he would come back with, "Do you mean this?" and post a couple of articles. And I know that that person will never stop learning, can't stop learning, is just, it's ingrained to them. So that's the number one thing I look for. The number 2 thing I look for is, do you have experience in a customer service atmosphere? Ideally one that sucks, like fast food or a call center, something where you're likely to be dealt with some unfair circumstances, and being able to demonstrate proficiency in that environment and an ability to learn and a passion for computers. That's a recipe for success in this industry. Anyone looking for tips on how to find a job would encourage you to demonstrate that. That, in my eye, is going to get you the farthest. Today, I had a chat with my boss, and I said to him, "I'm feeling a little shaky as a manager today. I'm having some concerns with communication inside my team, but communicating with the team adjacent to me." And he reassured me that those aren't concerns that I need to be worried about. But I think it's important to call out and highlight that it's okay to feel like that throughout your career. In fact, if you don't feel that sometimes, I feel like that's a state of stagnation if it goes on for too long. Being able to look at yourself and reflect on, what can I do better? How can I improve? Is what's going to take you to that next step. I've got a couple of inspirational anecdotes and items that I want to bring up as well. And one of those is the inferiority complex. And I remember the moment that that I lost mine. And this is very common, at least in this industry. I don't know if it's common in every industry. I was in my mid-30s, so this would have been about 10 years ago. I'd already been to industry conferences. I'd long since been a team lead, head technical person with the organizations that I've been with. And I would go home at night and I would look at my paycheck and I would think, my day really wasn't that hard. This doesn't seem right. Why am I compensated like this? I don't feel like I've done enough to be able to earn this. I didn't have anyone coaching me through this, and I didn't really know what I was going through at that time. But the moment it hit me, a junior guy was asking me about a problem with his lab that he was working in. And I stopped and I thought about it for about 30 seconds. And I went, I know what your problem is. And I said, this and this and this and this and this. Sure enough, that's what it was. And then it hit me. It took me 30 seconds. I had in-depth networking. I had in-depth Windows, Linux, some Unix, and some VMware expertise. And I could recall that in 30 seconds from a junior person describing something to me. And I went, well, I am an expert, and this is what they're paying for. I believe everybody's going to go through this, and I've seen it a number of times. And it was a scary experience alone, but I hope that when it comes time for you people, you look at this and say, okay, I'm not alone. This does happen. It's a mental issue, and it can be quite emotional for some people. I've had some grown men just break down and cry, overwhelmed by it. It's a real thing. I don't own a computer. I haven't really owned a computer since I started working for managed service providers. I owned a really nice gaming computer back when really nice gaming computers were $2,500. And it's my understanding that you don't get a really nice gaming computer for less than $5,000 now. And I looked at it as a hobby, and I built my dream machine. And after I built my dream machine, I knew that I could build my dream machine again, or if I'm only going to get one chance at life, maybe I should experience building my dream machine in a different capacity. I picked up road biking, and I looked at it as similar kind of hobby. There's different components. I can put it together. I can be nerdy about this. I was experiencing at that time going to parties and wanting to talk about my two hobbies, computers or cars. And I knew both of them to a level that it was just no fun. I couldn't talk about popular media. I just was off on my own. So it was a concerted effort to learn something that wasn't computers. And since then, I've diverged farther and farther away. In fact, I've diverged so far away that I'm just about done building my house. It's on 2 acres, about an hour outside Winnipeg. I don't have internet. I don't currently have running water. I recently got heat that turns on with the flick of a switch. I don't have grid-tied electricity. I don't even have that big of a solar system. Manage my power carefully. I recently got a flush toilet, but I have to truck water in and dump it in there. So I flush my toilet a lot less than most people do. It's a lot of work to do that. But before that, I didn't have any of these things. And my hobby and my experience in life was I've seen the business, and I've seen the technology side, or at least from my perspective of the world. How did we get here? And kind of made it my hobby to build my own home and live in an RV and experience the human condition over time. Really shortly, cold food storage is pretty important, but just as important is you need to find something to do with that food when you're done consuming it. And a place to do your paperwork is underappreciated in modern day. Next up in my career, I don't really work on the tools that much. I try to stay pretty hands-off. I did get called recently by a previous enterprise I worked for to help them out of a ransomware issue. And that was a change of pace. That was, like visiting an old friend. But generally speaking, my time with computers is pretty done. And when people ask me what I do for a living, I tell them I work with computers, and they say, well, that means you program. And I said, no, I don't program. Oh, but you build computers. Well, no, I don't build computers. Well, then what do you do? And I say, if you're going to spend $1 million on an invoice, you probably want me on your side because 10%, if you get 10% savings on $1 million, that's $100,000. And I'm the kind of person that's going to help you get that, or at least, at the very least, make sure that that $1 million that you're intending to spend or need to spend is going to provide that value for you. That's led me more to the business of computers. And as I said earlier, I didn't take a traditional path. I didn't go out and learn from experts, learn from teachers, learn the things that are accepted as needed in the industry. I took the hard road. My next path is I'm looking at getting my GED, because that's the minimum requirement to get a bachelor's of business admin. After computers comes business for me. That's my career in a nutshell. And if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I sure hope that this has been insightful and a little different than what you've seen. And I just wanted to highlight that there's different ways of approaching this. And I can add one more thing here. If it were up to me, I think that this career, this industry, should change to a red seal trade. I think there needs to be a mix of mentorship and classroom education. And if you take a look at the two major learning paths, the traditional learning paths, the university side of things, and the more vocational direction that you lot are taking, when I look at a resume, I prefer to see that side, because that's less training that I'm going to have to do when that person comes to me. Ideally, they've done a practicum and gotten some of that mentorship ahead of time. Anyway, enough about me.
Well, that was an amazing presentation, Marcel. I think you said a lot of things that most would find really reassuring. You mentioned, I think you look for, some people that have the customer service experience, like dealing in fast food and those types of things, like a call center, which was my last job as well. So it's reassuring for a lot of us as new students to know that that experience is still valued. Some people overlook that and don't realize that you can still, get a lot out of that experience. But overall, great story. I thought that was pretty funny when you were talking about the keylogger in your school. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's good. We have some questions here. I'll just read them in the order that they came in. So the first one is, we talked about some stories about you taking on a co-op students. What are some notable traits that make students successful?
When you say successful, I mean, we would have to define what success is. Successful in getting a co-op position or successful time in that position?
Let's say successful time in that position. What would they have to be to leave and get a glowing reference from you, for example? Perhaps. I'd assume something like that is what the question meant.
Sure. Engagement is going to be the number one thing. I feel less like this now, but this is still a bit of a concern for me. I don't want to feel like I'm pestering people. I want to come to them. I want to add value. And if you're a co-op student, you're likely going to be in an environment where we haven't defined a position for that co-op student. Instead, we might have a collection of things that, well, you know, maybe this person might be good at handling this. Hey, can you do a server inventory for me? What does that mean? It could mean all kinds of things, but the more engagement that you have as a student, the more you leverage the people around you, the more you're going to get tips to get through that. Pester the people you're working with, for lack of a better term. Really engage with them. Even my team, the people that engage with me the least, they don't get the exciting projects. They don't come top to mind. If I've got a project to move an application to the cloud, I'm going to give it to somebody that's shown initiative, that is interested in doing that. So as a co-op student, show initiative, be engaging. You're not pestering, unless you get an eye roll every time you come up to a senior or a manager. Not this guy again, but error on the side of more engagement, less engagement.
Awesome. That was a great question. Another question we have here, this was when you were talking about cloud and Kubernetes or Kubernetes. I don't know which is the preferred way to say it, but it is, what are the top books or resources you suggest for looking to learn more about cloud and Kubernetes?
Oh man, that's a tough one for me. I quit social media a number of years ago, and we all look at our phones. We're constantly engaging with things like that, and I quit social media on the premise that I knew that I was going to not reduce my time looking at the screen, although I would really like to, but instead change how I receive information. And I don't receive information through traditional books. I read articles. I've been careful to craft my news feed to give me a mix of interest, personal, but also interest, business. And in addition to that, if I want to know about Kubernetes, I will call up my top 3 Kubernetes vendors, and I will tell them that they need to tell me about it. I have a dedicated Red Hat person, so I'll call Red Hat up and say, tell me about OpenShift. I have a number of dedicated VMware people, and I'll call them up and say, please tell me about Tanzu. That's not realistic for people getting into this, but the next time you're scrolling through your news feed, thumbs upping and thumbs downing something, you come across something security or infrastructure related, make sure you thumbs that up and try to cater your feed to be able to bring industry trends to you. The last thing you want is a board member knowing about a Log4j patch before you.
I like that advice of crafting your newsfeed. I've heard that recently from another speaker, was that set like Google alerts for things in your career and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's a great tip. Another question here, what tips would you give to those who might want to get into management roles as they progress in their career? Or I guess maybe you could round it more to what makes a good manager, or if that helps.
Yeah, that's really a good question for somebody that's not a manager. But if I had to try to sum that up, well, my news feed is pretty important to me. Part of my news feed is Inc. magazine. I read that quite a bit. I read, my favorite book is by Chris Hadfield. It's an astronaut's guide to life on Earth. And he managed a couple of big things. He was a commander of a spaceship, space shuttle. He was the commander of the International Space Station, and learning some approaches to life, and learning how he guides people through reading books or through his books through life is important for me to disconnect and try to put myself in the shoes of other people on my team. I also know that management involves interfacing with other managers, and there is a political component to that. I don't know if anyone has brought up to you. And you spend a lot of time earning political chits. Hey, can you do this for me? Hey, I know this isn't normally how we would do it. I can't give you a ticket for this, but can you quickly get this one in for me? Can you do me a solid? As you build that political clout with other managers at your tier, every once in a while, when you really need to cash in and put your foot down and say, no, I'm sorry, that's going to have to be my way this time. They're more likely to bend there. I view my team the way you would, in some aspects, the way you would view an org chart. I'll take the human condition out of it first, and I'll think, okay, if I'm looking at this, if I'm looking at my team as a piece of code, how do I want this and this organized? I'll bust out Visio. I'll draw Visio. I'll make tags for people. I will organize people pragmatically first, and then take a step back and add the human element into it. How can I get Johnny to move from an engineering position to an analyst position? That seems like that would be a demotion, moving from engineering to operations. But operations is exactly what he's good at, and operations is what the business needs him to do. So I'll think about that first, but there's two sides to it. There's that pragmatic component, what the business needs and what works for the business, and what the employee needs. In addition to that, some things I try to do to help separate my team from other teams is we do team things. Like at a previous place, we had Spirit Animal Fridays. We all went to these Spirit Animal shirt places, and we made a group order. Everybody identified with an animal, and on Fridays, we showed up with our Spirit Animal shirts. And we would do themed lunches, and that we might do a Mexican theme. Everybody would sit at the whiteboard. Okay, what is Mexican food? And we'd write down a whole bunch of different things, and okay, who's taking what? Everybody would take and strike off a component. And this did a couple of things. One, it had us working together in an aspect that wasn't it wasn't technology related. We weren't necessarily under the gun for anything. We were doing this for fun. It also had us, when you're working with people 8 hours a day, you spend more time with them than you do your mom or your brother or your sister or your dad or your uncle or your cousin. And they really become a part of your family. Some of them you like and some of them you don't like so much. But it's important to foster that relationship just as much as it's important to work efficiently together. The other thing it does is it puts a sense of pride in the team. we would have other teams start to emulate what we did. An accounting department said, we're going to have pajama pant Fridays. And I thought this was great. It incited a little bit of competition. Who had the coolest team? We all work together to be the coolest team. And when you feel like you're working together to be the coolest team, you can't help but not be more efficient. Another thing that I would like to do is, since not every, and we haven't gotten here yet, we need to get here, but we haven't gotten here because of the current situation. I would like to take everybody in the department and identify the people that traditionally don't work well together and put them into an escape room with the prize of a day or 2 days off. Now you're in a position where you generally work well together, but if you all play nice together, you all get a big reward. And in these types of environments, you'll have silos. Our current silos are, we have a networking, we have a server storage backup, we have a client technologies, we have a retail technologies, and we have a help desk. These are our silos inside the infrastructure team. And I work pretty good, and my team works pretty good inside of there. But making that bridge to another group is sometimes difficult. If we have a team building exercise like that, we're going to build new connections, and the flow of information and tasks is going to move a whole lot more freely. I hope that's what the question was.
I think those are some great tips as like the management perspective or like a senior supervisor role. So I think that answers that question pretty good. I think those are some great team building exercises, like the food one. Food usually brings people together quite well. So we have one here about cloud governments. You'd mentioned something earlier about cloud governments. Can you elaborate on that?
So cloud, we all know that cloud is just somebody else's computer. Because I clearly come from a different era of computing, I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty. I'm not going to get into the weeds of constant integration and constant development, that pipeline. I know what it is, and I can talk relatively intelligently about it, but that's never where my value is going to be. So that's left to the experts in that field. I'm also never going to develop an application on the cloud. It's not where my career has taken me. My value in the cloud is, how do I make sure that those applications are protected? And how do I make sure that the appropriate people have access to them and nobody that doesn't need access to them is appropriate? So cloud governance, some of the things that I do for cloud governance is, for anyone that, has everyone here been on Azure? Can I talk about Azure in depth? Can I make some, okay. So, excuse me. In Azure, you have a subscription, and everything gets billed to your subscription. And you're probably used to working with one subscription because that's all you really need for your school tasks. But I work in an enterprise that our newest line of business is optometrists in northern communities, remote optometrists in northern communities, and our Alaskan business line has taken on e-commerce, and our developers know nothing about developing an e-commerce platform. So we've hired out a company to do e-commerce development for us. Well, the optometry business, the people working in that portion of the business, don't need access to the e-commerce sets of resources. So I've created multiple subscriptions, and I map them back to different types of financial resources. We've got CapEx or capital expenditures, and OpEx or operational expenditures. And to be able to develop the process of identifying that this project gets billed to this budget item and this project gets billed to this budget item is important in my mind's eye. And as a leader of technology in the company, it's important that I have the foresight whenever possible when setting up this environment to cater to current needs, but also future needs of accounting. Accounting looks at my department and has a set of buckets for the department, but there's no IS budget for e-commerce. It's an IS budget for IS. So developing that policy through procedure and through technology to make sure that we've governed ourselves accordingly should this come up would be a part of governance. We license our roughly 1,200 M365 licenses by security group membership. And you don't have to do it that way. We chose to do it that way because we build a template of what a user is supposed to look like in Active Directory. And if they're supposed to have an M365 license, to make it easier for us to manage that, we'll put them in that security group. So governance can look like a bunch of different things, but there's a couple of components of what governance looks like in an enterprise on the cloud.
Cool. We got about 7 minutes left. I have a question here. I'm not sure if you have children or not, but somebody asked, how do you raise kids off the grid?
My daughter is 22.
Oh.
She's married to a wonderful dude, and I didn't start building this house until 2 years ago. She lives in Edmonton.
Okay, fair enough.
My brother is raising kids off grid, but he's cut from an entirely different cloth.
I see. We got one more here. We talked about Visio. What tools and strategies do you use to organize and prioritize your work to best meet team goals, expectations, and deliveries?
So when the business wants something, we call it an enhancement request. An enhancement request gets created as a Jira ticket. And we have PMOs and business analysts and project managers that manage it as Jira tickets. Inside my team, we use Trello. We have tickets in our help desk software that come in a variety of different ways. There's incidents for break fix. There's tasks for accomplishing small tasks that are not larger than a bread basket or a bread box. We've got change requests. There's a number of tools that we use. Yeah.
Cool. Do you guys use GitHub at all? No.
No. This is a 350-year-old lineage, and with great legacy comes great legacy. But let me tell you, our SourceSafe 2005 is set up real nice.
Well, we have no more questions, so I suppose we can just kind of wrap it off here. Yeah, that was a great presentation. Appreciate you coming down and talking to us all.
No problem.
Anyone have anything to say?
No, I appreciate you, Marcel, coming by. I think we've been trying to get you on for a while now, so it's actually pretty happy you got to talk to some students before the term ends here.
Yeah, I guess you guys got to be close to done, right?
I think April 22nd or 25th, something like that, is our kind of last days, and then we got the summer. Yeah.
Summer.
Yeah.
That must be nice.
Mm-hmm.
With working full time and building a house. When I bought my property, it was fully treed, so I cleared all the land and built the house. And my schedule is pretty full. I don't really get summers. This summer, I'm trying to take a little bit of summer, and I'd really like to be a CIO someday. I've done some reading as to what it takes to become a CIO, and the articles I read tell me I need to experience a different side of the business. I always thought that would be logistics.